Hello and welcome to another amazing episode of Strange Tales Weekly. Tonight we have an awesome show planned for you, but before we get started, let me introduce my co-host Eric.
Hey.
And Joe.
Hi.
And our special guest tonight is Lon Strickler. Welcome, Lon.
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Okay, so Lon Strickler is a Fortean researcher and author and publisher of the syndicated Phantoms and Monsters blog. He began the blog in 2005, which has steadily grown in popularity and is read daily by tens of thousands of paranormal enthusiasts, investigators, and those seeking the truth. His research and reports have been featured on hundreds of online media sources. Several of these published reports have been presented on various television segments, including History Channel's Ancient Aliens, Sci-Fi's Paranormal Witness, Fact or Faked, Paranormal Files, Destination America's Monsters and Mysteries in America. He's been on several radio broadcasts, including multiple guest appearances on Coast to Coast AM. He was also featured on Destination America's Monsters and Mysteries in America television show for the Sykesville Monster episode. Lon also hosts Arcane Radio, a live weekly show and podcast. Welcome! Welcome, Lon. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay.
So, how did you get interested in cryptozoology?
Well, I was doing paranormal investigations for many, many years. I started back in actually in the late 70s. That wasn't something that many people thought about at that time. It was, of course, now with TV and everything, everybody knows all about paranormal investigations. But, I was kind of doing a lot of this on my own. I had just come out of high school. So, so I did that for several years. Then in 1981, I actually had an encounter with a Bigfoot-like creature near Sykesville, Maryland. And, after that occurred, I decided to make cryptids as part of my research.
No, that's neat. So you went from ghosts and that kind of led into that. Let me open my next thing here. Do you feel in your experience there are more or less cryptid sightings recently? And why do you believe that's the case?
Oh, you mean as far as being more sightings as we're going on?
Yeah. Do you think more or less are happening nowadays?
Oh, it's much more. People are more inclined to actually make a report as opposed to, being afraid to do that, being fearful of ridicule. But no, I mean, people are coming forward when they see something unusual.
You grew up around Gettysburg, right?
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about the battlefields of Gettysburg and your experiences there?
Sure. I was born and raised near Gettysburg. I used to spend a lot of time on a battlefield when I was a kid. And I always knew that I had some intuitive ability. So I had a lot of experiences on that battlefield. I saw a lot of apparitions, heard a lot of sounds, weird activity, unexplained activity. And of course, it's, since I moved back up, near the Gettysburg, I lived down near Baltimore for about 40 years and I moved back up to the area. So, I will occasionally get out in the battlefield and I still experience a lot of things there.
What's the wildest thing you've seen there?
Yeah.
I guess the actually one day when I was 8 years old, I was in an area where they can call Death Valley, which sits kind of between Little Round Top, the wheat field, and Devil's Den, and there was a lot of activity there on the second day of the battle. But I was on my bike on the road, and all of a sudden I started sensing all kinds of weird activity. I was hearing gunshot, cannon fire, screaming. I was seeing movement, smelling gunpowder, blood, out the whole 9 yards. It was eye opening, and that was probably, I guess, that real first impact experience was kind of the one you kind of remember. But like I said, I've seen a lot of different apparitions on the field in particular.
That really freaked you out at 8 years old.
Go ahead.
At 8 years old, that had to really freak you out.
It did in a way. I always knew that I had some type of ability. I could sense spirit energy. Yeah. It wasn't like I was raised in a haunted house or anything like that. But
so that wasn't really new to you when that happened.
Not particularly. I mean, but I must have been there at the right time. I mean, it just seemed like everything came together that one day I was there, and it just,
Do you believe that like certain paranormal activity, like somewhere like Gettysburg, like it's going to, maybe if there's like, it has to align correctly, maybe with like the time or the stars or wherever the planet is, to cause like more of a stronger vision like what you had?
No, I don't know. I mean, I guess if you get the perfect storm as far as location and imprint of energy, I guess it kind of opens up to someone like myself, and I think that's probably what happened.
That's very cool. Or do you think you saw like through a time, like a rip in time, basically?
Possible.
Like,
it's possible. I mean, it could have been something like that. I don't think it was residual. I think it was something had opened up, or the veil thinned at a certain point, and I was able to sense all that.
That's it. So you've had lots of experiences, or more experiences like that throughout your life?
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't expect it. It just happens,
I'm like,
does it still happen today, or more like when you were a kid?
No, it actually happens more now as I've grown older. When I used to have the experiences when I was a kid, it was pretty vivid back then. But as I got a little older and was out on my own, it kind of waned away. I was young, was working, I had a young family, and had responsibilities, and you kind of I guess I didn't notice it as much. It probably was going on around me, but I was more concerned about other things. So when I eventually, as I got older, I started I guess I started opening up more with it. And when you do open up and you start being more open-minded about it, it just seems to manifest itself.
So most of your recent work has been involving the Mothman, correct?
Yeah, the Chicago Phantom, I call it, or winged humanoids in Chicago.
So how did you become like a point person for that?
Well, it was interesting. I have a colleague by the name of Manuel Navarrete, who runs the UFO Clearinghouse website. He lives in Chicago. And he and I have exchanged information for years. So in April of 2017, well, first of all, let me preface, there had been some winged humanoid activity in Chicago in late summer of 2011. There were 3 sightings. So it was something that had happened before. There wasn't a whole lot of fanfare about those sightings, but most of us in the crypto world knew about it. Well, anyway, in April of 2017, a report came up on the MUFON CMS about an encounter. A woman who happened to be an attorney. She was walking her dog in Oz Park, and it was in the evening, and she came across this being that was standing in the park. Stood about 6-7 foot in height, dark being, and it had like wings extending from its back that actually reached above its body. And the first thing she noticed was a dog. Her dog cowered behind her. It was afraid, or whatever it was. As she was standing there watching this thing, it turned and looked at her with these bright red eyes. So of course, she was very concerned about what it was, but it didn't stick around long. It basically jettisoned straight up into the air without using its wings. I mean, this thing didn't open its wings and fly off. It just jettisoned in the air. And at a point, she heard it screaming as it flew away. So that report, like I said, came up on the MUFON CMS. We were lucky enough to be able to find her because MUFON doesn't share their information. So we found her. Manuel actually interviewed her. Then there were some subsequent reports in the city as far as, and those reports were basically very similar to the Mothman, or the Owlman, what people were calling it. And in fact, there was an Hispanic neighborhood where one sighting was seen, where the witnesses actually described it as a Lacusa, which is a Owlman-like being supposedly seen in and around the Rio Grande area of southern Texas and northern New Mexico. So, the description was very similar, other than the wings were more of a feathered type being. So in the earlier reports, the wings were like that of a, like the typical Mothman description from Point Pleasant, or this Owlman-like being. So there were a couple other reports that came up on the MUFON CMS, very similar to the first report. I guess there's about 3 or 4 of them. And I decided to go ahead and start running an ad on Google, tailoring it towards the Chicago area for witnesses to come forward. So that's how I started getting a lot of stuff. And after that, most of the sightings were very, very similar to that of a bat-winged being. And stand anywhere from 5 to 6 foot in height, very thin body, small head. Some had red eyes, a very, malnutritious body, or whatever you want to call it. Wingspan of anywhere from 10, some up to 15 foot. But the wing structure was very similar. I mean, it was like that of a bat or a gargoyle. There were some differences. Some had the arm attached to the wing. Others had detached arms. And we had some sightings where the head itself had like a ray coming from the top, the crest, extending backwards beyond the head. There were a few different variations. Of course, the sightings most of them were concentrated in the city limits. A vast majority were on the waterfront area. And the neighborhood, the little village neighborhood, actually had many sightings. So we had sightings as far south as northern Indiana. But now the sightings we are getting are mostly north of the city. We've had a few in Indiana. But at this point, and the sightings, and these include sightings that we believe there was actually some type of encounter. I say about 85 sightings right now.
think we got the map, Eric. Did you see
Yeah,
that?
we got the map. I got the map up there.
We can open the map.
Was there any kind of like a season that it was more popular, or like
we did think that it was, going to be seen during warmer weather, spring, summer, or early fall. But recently, we have been getting some sightings during the winter. So, I don't know if the weather has much to do with it at this point.
And the sightings during the winter then were more up north, out of the city then?
Yeah, recently. We're getting a lot of sightings in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin, north of the city. Yeah.
Wow.
Must have heard about the cheese.
Yes.
So one here I see is a flying witch. Is that what? Is it just like a witch?
The woman who saw that and made that report, she was Hispanic. I think because of her beliefs that's what she said it was, but the description was very similar to the other descriptions. She just happened to call it a witch.
Called a witch. Got it. Some of them are called like different, so I didn't know if they were kind of this. Are they all the same species?
Yeah, we're getting anywhere from black devil to I don't know, demon this or some. It just depends where it's seen at. People each have their own moniker for it.
Yeah, we'll have to put a link to the map. It's like when you click on it, and then it brings up the description of what happened and where and everything. So it's really neat. And then a link back to, yeah, very cool. Yeah, and then a link back to Phantoms and Monsters there. Very cool. I love that.
So can you tell us a little bit about the mythos behind the Mothman?
Well, winged humanoids have been something that have been reported for centuries. And in fact, the Native Americans, First Nations, had descriptions of these flying humanoids, or of course, they used to talk about the Thunderbird. But I think it was more to them as a spiritual being, even though they could see it. I really don't know what their explanation was. Was why they thought it came and showed up. I know I've talked to several people who are friends of mine who reside on the Navajo reservation in northern New Mexico and Arizona, and they have some lore as far as these winged beings, in particular owls. They're seen as a harbinger of bad tidings or portent of some type. But I think that for the most part, that's what these things were seen as. But as far as actual winged humanoids or a winged being that people started describing as the Mothman, that all started really in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, back in the late 60s.
So there's some photographic evidence. I know Joe's got one pulled up right now. Is there a lot of photographic evidence of Mothman out there, or like outside of Chicago even, or?
Very little. It's all subjective for the most part. I have collected a few. The one you put up there, that one right there, that was from 2011. Those 3 sightings, that was the first sighting. Actually, that photograph, it doesn't really look like the description of what we have been receiving in recent years. I really don't know what that is. We did receive one photograph during this flap in 2017, but unfortunately, these sightings are very fleeting sightings. And they don't seem like they're afraid to show up and, to be seen, but they don't stick around long enough for anybody to get a photograph or anything. We did get one photograph that was very indiscernible as to what it was.
Very cool. I was going to say, we were talking a little bit earlier. I lost my train of thought on the Mothman. Oh, do you believe the Mothman, there's one? Is there many? And do they live around Chicago? Or do you think that they travel through a portal? How do you?
Well, I think for the most part, they're flesh and blood. I think they are corporeal beings. I think they do possibly come through some type of portal from another reality. As far as the sightings that have gone on in and around Chicago, I think there have been about at least 3 of these beings. Now, are they related? I'm pretty sure they are in some respect, since they're all being seen around the same time. I don't know. It could be many more. I don't know. But, there have been a lot of theories as to what this thing is. Now, we have had two witness accounts, one in Chicago, in and around an area around Wrigley Field, where these 2 elderly ladies, and it was during the daytime, they were walking north towards the stadium, and they saw this being fly over an intersection and just simply disappeared like it went through an invisible doorway. Then we had another report come to us of an earlier sighting several years ago, where this woman in Rockford, Illinois, was actually sitting on her friend's porch with her and her husband, and they saw this thing flying around above the trees across the street from them, and as they watched it, it simply disappeared. So, I don't know if that is really what's going on, but there have been a few other theories. There have been occult theories. There have been possibly a theory to do with some type of I don't know how you would say it, but something to do with Lake Michigan, something to do with the water, being related to water. A lot of these sightings are around water. There have been, for years, there have been reports of UFO activity around Lake Michigan. A lot of strange things being seen. So, it's something we really haven't pinned down. I think the interdimensional theory is probably, even though it's difficult to prove, but from the anecdotal evidence that we received, I think it's probably the most likely explanation.
Do you think that it's this, like, the same situation like with like a Bigfoot or other cryptids? Like it's a interdimensional type thing. That's why we can't find where they live. That's why we don't see, a lot of evidence.
Yeah, I think the cryptid phenomena, and you're talking about anything that's unknown to science, I think there probably is an aspect to it as far as interdimensional, even maybe alien, of some type. I for years I had thought for that, there was a good possibility that Bigfoot may have been an interdimensional being. I'm more convinced now that it is, because of some of the reports we've received over the years from other investigators. People actually seeing this thing just disappear. Yeah, like I said, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that suggests that may be the case.
Yeah.
Is there any indication of how a portal like that might work, or how that could come to be, like relations to anything that might have happened like on our end? Like a hadron collider or anything like that?
Or maybe a nuclear bomb.
I don't know. I mean, it's it's not really proven as to it actually being able to occur, with quantum physics and the use the use of quantum technology, particle accelerators and such. Is there a chance that a doorway could open somehow? Yeah, I think it's very possible. That's something we've even looked into with this thing in Chicago, because there is a particle accelerator located in Chicago, or just north of Chicago, out in Cook County. So, that's something that we have looked into.
Do you get religious people saying it's a demon or something?
You're always going to get people that are going to say these things are demons. I mean, that seems to be the catch-all phrase for something that's unexplained and people think that are malevolent. So, yeah, I mean, people are going to call it that.
Isn't there a lot of times like a kind of evil feeling about it, though, too? They report.
Some people who have come across this thing have a feeling of dread, foreboding. Why that happens, I don't know. I mean, there have been people that have been up close to this thing who have become weak, actually fell to their knees. That happened on 2 occasions that I am aware of. So, there are physical reactions to these beings, more so than just fear and some type of emotional response. There are some physical responses.
How about like attacks of any kind? Attacks on small animals or anything?
Well, that's something we have been keeping an eye on. We have not been able to associate this thing connected to like pets being missing or animals mutilation or anything like that. There was a report back in 2015 of a couple, an older couple, who were the female was actually attacked by this thing.
Oh.
And this was in Chicago. It was secondhand information from a friend of her, the woman's son, who told me about this. The family itself, who were actually Native American, were very scared to come forward and talk about it. But he told me about it. Her and her husband were actually driving around, and they confronted this thing while they were in the car, and it seemed to be following them. And at one point, when they stopped at a light or a stop sign, this thing landed on the car and tried to attack her through the side window, which is cracked open. He took off. This thing, went off the car. They thought they had lost it because they headed home. They thought they had lost it. They didn't see it or anything. So they got out of the car and were walking toward their house, and this thing suddenly came down and attacked her on the back. Now, I didn't get any pictures of anything, but he swears that she sustained a fairly sizable and deep incision or laceration on the back.
Hey.
I'd expect there'd be some pretty good car damage there too.
I guess it was. I mean, he never mentioned anything about scratches or anything on the car or on the windows.
Well, I hope I never see one. That's for sure.
No,
Yeah,
I don't particularly feel. I'm not particularly in any hurry to see one.
You talked about animals. Wasn't that Oz Park experience? The dog didn't want to go or something.
Yeah, the dog actually cowered behind the witness.
Like before, that was like before she even left the house, though, right?
No, I mean she had a Jack Russell Terrier. They were walking in the park, it sensed this thing and actually stopped walking and went behind her and cowered behind her.
Mm.
So it reacted to it. It
Okay.
wanted nothing to do with it.
I was thinking it like detected it before it even got to the park, kind of like a
I don't know.
sixth sense. Okay.
It may have been reluctant. A lot of times animals can sense this thing much quicker than humans. But there have been occasions where there have been pets around that just never really seem to sense anything.
Hmm.
Sorry.
So are there other winged cryptids that you're into specifically, or is there?
Well, I take reports on anything. I mean, you talk about the Illinois, Indiana area. There have been a lot of weird winged being sightings. Of course, the Thunderbird comes to mind. There have been a lot of pterosaur type being sightings. But that's something that's been experienced in a lot of different places. I've received reports, all over North America. Not so much, worldwide, but we do occasionally get some worldwide.
So maybe there's also a Terran time where the pterodactyls fly through somewhere.
It may very well be. There was a fairly famous incident back in the early part of the 20th century in an area called Iowa. It was described as the Van Meter visitor. Chad Lewis wrote a book about it. That being was described very much like that of a pterosaur. So, there have been several of those type of incidents out in the western part of the United States. Well, back in the 1800s, there was an incident around Salt Lake City, and there were a couple more in California as well.
Oh, cool. See, we have something. We've got petrosaurs over here. And then isn't there something? There's the big bird of Texas. Is that a petrosaur as well?
It could be. I mean, some of the descriptions of these large bird-like beings have been pterosaur-like. I have talked to several investigators over the years who have reported these pterosaur-like beings. Some of them actually believe that there's like a flyway from Central America up through Mexico into the United States. That they actually may follow the same flyways that birds follow. So they may actually be migratory as well.
And the big bird of Texas, if I recall from Jess's story on that several months ago, had dealt with portals in that one too.
Yeah, that supernatural aspect to all types of cryptids is prevalent a lot, and it just doesn't go with Bigfoot and other type of beings. It's these pterosaurs are also said to be supernatural.
Speaking of Bigfoot, you mentioned having an encounter with a Bigfoot-like creature before we started talking about Gettysburg. I think we kind of glossed over it.
Yeah, right.
It's kind of a big deal, but we still just moved on.
Totally big deal.
About that a little bit.
Well, this happened on May 9th, 1981. It was in the morning, about 10 o'clock or so. I was fly fishing on the South Branch of the Patapsco River, about a mile downstream from Sykesville, Maryland. Nice day. It's an area I had fished a lot. I was on the south bank and noticed a mixed breed stray dog across the river, about maybe 40, 50 yards from me, just going in and around the weeds and such. I didn't pay him a whole lot of mind. I knew he was there. But after a few minutes or so, I heard the dog start barking and growling. So I figured he may have rustled up a deer or something over there. A lot of deer in that area. And when I was watching, I saw something bobbing up and down in the weeds, some type of dark creature. So I stopped fishing, tried to move a little closer, though I had waders on, so it wasn't that easy. I wanted to get a better look at why this dog was reacting the way it did. Then suddenly I heard a loud yelp coming from the dog, and then this creature stood up. And the best I could tell was this thing was about 7 to 8 foot tall and had some dark matted hair. I could only see the body from the chest up because the rest of the body was obscured by weeds. But, even another thing was it was also making a ticking sound. So, I mean, I didn't, but I eventually figured it was like gnashing its teeth together for some reason. There was a bit of a musty smell, odor that I was sensing once in a while. So, of course, I said I had waders on, so I couldn't do but so much. But it actually stepped out of the weeds, and I got a better look at it. This thing was, I would say, looked more human than it did than gorilla or ape or whatever. It had a face very similar to that of what the descriptions were at that time of like a Neanderthal.
Oh.
Most of the hair was around the body. The face itself didn't have any hair on it, though it had hair on the head and around the sides of the head. It walked out of the weeds. It was definitely male because I could see the genitalia and such. And it looked at me and just turned around and started walking up toward the woods. And I mean, it was moving at a pretty good clip, but it wasn't running. So I didn't know what to think. I had heard of Bigfoot before, but it wasn't something I was investigating. It was, so my car was very nearby, so I went ahead and got into the car, waders and all, and started heading back to town. I did get to there was a bar that was very nearby. I called the local police. I could actually hear them kind of laughing under their breath, but they said, "Well, look, go back to where you saw this thing, and we'll meet you there." So of course it was only like a mile away, so I was like 3 or 4 minutes away from it. I got back in the car and drove right back to the location. And by that time, there was a local police officer there. It was, in fact, I think there was a state trooper a little further away, but this was a Howard County police officer. And when I drove up to him, he told me to turn around and leave. And I told him, well, I was told to come back here. I'm the one that made the report. He said, I don't care. Just just turn around and get out of here. So, I lived in Sykesville at the time. So I went ahead and drove home, waited about an hour or so, and decided to go back. And by that time, when I got back, I mean, there were cards everywhere. They had the tape up. And of course, this was 1981. So they didn't have SUVs. They had Wagoneers at that time, black Wagoneers. So I knew it was federal. There were federal there. And it was, state police, county police, local cops, and federal. And there were guys with dogs going through all the weeds in the woods, and there were people everywhere. I could hear helicopters. I didn't actually see one. So I had to park maybe a quarter mile away from it because there were so many cars on the road. So I walked up, and then there was a Howard County police officer standing there at the tape where they had the road blocked. And I asked him, I said, well, what's going on? He kind of laughed at me. He said, somebody saw Bigfoot. And I didn't tell him I was the one who made the report. So, it was interesting. I said, well, anything turn up? And he said, I don't know. He said, I heard somebody's found some hair evidence or some kind of thing. He was kind of vague about it, but there were a lot of people standing there. So
I've never heard of a Bigfoot sighting getting that much attention. Like,
Yeah, right?
you don't hear, you don't hear that happening, and especially early back then. So, this was a unique situation, and I think it had to do with the locale and something that happened earlier that day.
Interesting.
After I did start investigating this, I became aware of a creature that was dubbed the Sykesville Monster. That were getting sightings in the area about 7 years before that. So I don't know if it had anything to do with that or not, but after I started going back and investigating this, there had been a sighting in nearby Marysville, Maryland, of a that was called into the police of this of a similar type being. I was probably like 2 or 3 hours before my sighting. So I believe they were actually tracking this thing. I think they were looking for it. Some of the theories I had heard from other people were that there was a federal facility not far from there that may have been doing some type of research. Now, I don't know if it was. I mean, this is an area near Baltimore and DC. There are a lot of buildings, unmarked buildings, in the entire area that people have no idea what they're there for. So, was there some type of government involvement? Very well could have been. For years I tried to get more answers to what actually happened. I did receive a letter from a Sykesville police officer who actually acknowledged everything that I said that happened. I had talked to people over the years about there was a building nearby that area that one individual who lived in town called the Monkey House. And I'm very aware of the building. The building was near a state hospital, but it was very well protected. There was a lot of barbed wire, high fencing around the area. The story back then was that it was the laundry building for the state hospital, but I was always intrigued by why there was so much security around it. So I don't know if that was some type of research facility or not. The building was completely demolished not so many years after that, and there are houses on that area now. So, there have been a lot of things that had come up. A lot of people have told me a lot of different stories, but there was definitely government involvement in this situation.
Wow. That's just crazy. Man. So it's like, could it be, do you think it was alien maybe? Do you think that it was a government experiment? No idea, just a Bigfoot that somehow the government was really interested in?
Bigfoot.
Yeah, right? Like he was the king of the Bigfoots maybe? I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, when after this happened to me, I became very interested in the Sykesville monster sightings. I actually went back and interviewed a lot of the people who had seen that thing earlier, seen the thing. There was one instance where this thing came to someone's house, got into their kitchen. There was another where it got into someone's garage. Something had been going around, and these people lived in that area along the river. Used to keep chicken coops. They did their own, they raised their own chickens. This thing had busted in several of those. So when I got the chance to talk to several of these people again, and I really actually talked to more people than who actually come forward earlier when the first mention of this thing took place. I probably talked to 8 more people who had encounters with it. So, and there were prints found at the time. John Lutz, who was an investigator in the area at the time, he had taken several plaster casts of a large footprint. So something was roaming around there. But my encounter was like 7 years later. So was it the same being? I don't know. There has been historically a lot of Bigfoot-like creature sightings in that area.
Since then, has there been stories related?
I think the last report was in 2002. There were after my encounter, there were 4 other A-class sightings that were reported in the general area.
So to switch gears a little bit, because we're getting closer to the end, can we talk a little bit about your new book, Alien Disclosure?
Sure.
Please. So tell us a little bit about it and how the project came about and your interest in.
Well, this is something I've been working on for a long time. I mean, I have been intending to write something about this phenomena for almost 10 years now. I have been working with an experiencer by the name of David Eckhart for over a decade. And David, who lives down in the Pensacola, Florida area, has had encounters, abductions, and such for years. It also involved his family as well. And he's still having encounters. So, I wanted to make him part of the book. But, for many, many years, I've been receiving alien abduction reports, experiencer reports, other related type things. As well, I have been abducted. At one point, I have had 3 encounters. And I don't know if this has to do with my intuition abilities, but I have had some scenarios shown to me over the years. So I write about all this. I mean, I write about my encounters a bit. I write about the abduction scenario, abductions of clients. One client who was taken and never returned.
Oh, that's not something I hear about much.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance to talk to David, he swears that most people who are abducted are never returned. And he said he has been shown a lot of this. David's a very believable guy. He, why that he was chosen to be told all this stuff is unclear, but it's still going on. And David actually had crippling rheumatoid arthritis about 15 years ago, and he was completely cured by these beings.
Wow.
He had a series of surgeries in his home by these beings over a 6-night period, and he was completely cured. And he's not the first person to have reported that to me. I have had other experiencers who have told me about being cured of cancer, other types of ailments. It does happen. And, the people who I've written about in the book were very believable. So that's why I decided to, disclose some of these alien encounters.
In all the interviews and that you spoke with people, is there a common thread between any of the people, or is it just like across all kinds of people, basically?
The scenario itself, and it's pretty evident that many of these experiencers are let's put it this way, their families are, and generation wise, are also abducted. It seems that they do try to concentrate on bloodlines. Is there a similar trait as far as people in blood or DNA? I don't know. I mean, there have been theories for years, in particular the negative RH factor. I don't know if that's true or not. You know, there's not enough evidence for me to say that that's actually true. You know, the abduction experience, the abduction scenarios have kind of they have changed over the years. It's more of a you know, people used to talk to you about being abducted, and it was always the Greys. I mean, you know, tall or small Greys that were doing the abduction and doing the procedures. It's over recent years, over the past, I'd say 20 years, it's gotten to where there are 4 or 5 different species involved in these abductions and procedures. Why this has happened, I have no idea.
What are the 5 that are basically more common nowadays?
Well, of course, you got the Greys, you got the tall, short Greys. Reptilians are usually involved. There are more and more humans involved, or beings that look like they're human. They may very well be hybrids of some type. There's insectoids, who are usually the ones running the show. I think the insectoids are an evolved reptilian being, and for whatever reason, I don't think it's a long-term evolvement. I think it's something like they actually metamorphosize as far as rank goes, and when they became, when they become overseers or whatever, I think they do actually change. Those are the basic type of base races or species of aliens that you do hear about in these abductions. But it does seem that they do work together. There is a common cause. They're all different from each other. There's a hierarchy, and they do follow an agenda.
Wow.
I like that even after all your research, you still keep an open mind, and you're basically like, yeah, I don't know what this means.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you gotta have it.
That's important. That's important.
When you get a report from someone, the first thing is to listen, take notes, listen, be as objective as possible. This person is coming forward to you. They believe they saw something or experienced something. If they didn't, they wouldn't be contacting you. Sure, you're going to get people that just want the attention, or, for whatever reason. And those are pretty easy to detect, But when it comes to separating the wheat from the chaff, it's important to listen to people, take those notes initially, compare it with other information that you've received over years, and get back in touch with them. Continue to ask questions. You become, when like it or not, when this happens, they contact you, then you become part of the story. So it's important for an investigator to be open-minded about it, to give them the benefit of doubt, at least early on, and to go from there. Because if it's a situation where, there are a lot of questions, I mean, they're going to come out. You don't want them, you don't want people embellishing on their stories anyway. So that's the main reason for kind of keeping quiet and listening to them.
So that book is out currently?
It was released last week. It's out in paperback, and it's in Kindle now.
You want to tell us a little bit about what you're working on next?
Yeah. Ooh.
Well,
Is it too
honestly, I've got probably 3 books in the pipeline that, you know, I've got outlines for, doing research for, you know, who knows which one's going to get the priority. You know, I was working on this alien disclosure book while before the winged humanoid sighting started, so that kind of went by the wayside, and I went ahead and wrote the book about, you know, the Mothman Dynasty book. But who knows? I mean, if something like that happens again, or something takes priority, then I'm probably going to put everything down and start on something else. I'm currently working on a flying cryptid book that goes into more detail of the phenomena overall. But, you know, it's just something else. I had people already talking about or asking me about doing a second book on the alien disclosure. So who knows?
Yeah, I've got the alien disclosure book in my cart. You know, I love aliens, so I can't wait to read that. We want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, Lon. Oops, and I just kicked my keyboard over. Sorry. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And how can people find you?
You can go to phantomsandmonsters.com. That's the blog. I put out a daily newsletter, free daily newsletter each day, 6 days a week. And, you know, if you have any reports or anything you want to discuss, my information's there. You can get in contact with me there. All the books are on Amazon. So just search my name, Lon Strickler, and it'll all come up.
Awesome.
And I also have a radio show, Arcane Radio, which I do live every Friday night.
Nice. So we'll put links to that in the description. And thank you so much for watching, everyone. And don't forget to stay strange.
Stay strange.
Thanks, Lon.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you so much, Lon.
No problem.